Welcome to the Daily Dispatch. First up, China has lifted its quarantine rule for the inbound travelers. We'll tell you what this means and if this really will help stabilize China's economy. Next, we'll tell you if democracy is in danger in Israel, as thousands protest in the country against the newly elected government of Prime Minister Netenyahu. And lastly, Pakistan is planning to sell 2 liquefied natural gas power plants to Qatar. We'll tell you what this means. We're here to give you the news and to help you infer the world around you. I'm Tayyaba Nisar, and here is your Daily Dispatch. China has lifted its quarantine rule for the inbound travelers, which was set during China's 3-year zero-COVID policy. The ease in curbs comes as China abruptly lifted the key parts of its restrictions on December 7th, following the anti-COVID restriction protests. Meanwhile, the Chinese top leadership has vowed to boost the economic growth and integration, following the slowdown in trade and production in order to stabilize the economy. President Xi Jinping acknowledged the difficulties that lie ahead of China despite the rollback on the curbs. The fall in Chinese exports has massively disrupted the global supply chains as well, with Apple admitting that the largest iPhone factory in Chengdu, China, was hit by the virus, which caused a slowdown in the production of iPhone 14. Large multinational companies where products are assembled are now looking to other countries, such as India, Thailand, and Vietnam, to avoid the disruption in the future. If these countries deliver on requests, the production industry might become more dispersed in Asia Pacific, loosening China's hold on the offshore production. China is opening up its borders at a time of a potential global recession and a current global energy crisis due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. However, there is a possibility that the growth will be slow and bumpy, especially in the first few months of 2023, in the back of a surge in COVID cases with overwhelmed health facilities and a historic property downturn, where the value of property sales, which account for approximately 30% of China's GDP, plunged more than 26% in 2022. Next, we'll give you news about the controversial new government of Israel. Thousands of people have taken to the streets in the capital of Israel, Tel Aviv, to protest against the newly elected government of Prime Minister Netanyahu, as it plans to undertake the judicial reforms and promises to increase the illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, which will erode the judicial freedom and justice in the country and undermine further any prospect of a two-state solution. The protesters carried posters with slogans like "Democracy in Danger," "Together Against Fascism and Apartheid," and included members of the civil society, Israeli leftist organizations, and the Palestinian members of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. The protests take place just days after a new coalition government took power, considered the most right-wing and radical government in Israel's history. Besides creating fear and apprehension among the Israeli people, the ascension to power of Prime Minister Netanyahu-led coalition government promises to encourage the settlements, which will increase violence and discrimination against the Palestinians in the occupied territory of East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Now, last week, the Israeli National Security Minister made a controversial visit to the Al-Aqsa compound in East Jerusalem, prompting the Palestinian protests and the UNSC to call for maintaining the status quo, which Jewish right-wing groups want to change and replace the mosque there with a Jewish temple. In the news from Pakistan now, the government is planning to sell 2 liquefied natural gas power plants to Qatar to generate revenue as fears of looming financial crisis increase and reserves plummet. Now, the 2 power plants, which generate 2,460 megawatt of electricity, were considered the 2 most important assets for privatization. However, they have been delisted from the Privatization Commission of Pakistan and now will be sold directly to Qatar under the Intergovernmental Commercial Transaction Act 2022. The economic experts say this measure suggests the government is in urgent need to increase its revenue and wants to avoid the cumbersome process of privatization. This development comes in the wake of growing economic fears as the reserves have dropped to less than $5 billion. The inflation stood at 24% in December 2022, and business confidence and market remain shaky. Now, these concerns have been amplified by delays in the IMF's next tranche, which will give $1.2 billion to Pakistan. Pakistan currently is in extended funding facility arrangement with the IMF. It is the 22nd such arrangement. Now, Pakistan reached a staff-level agreement with the IMF in 2022 to resume the loan, but disagreements over key economic policy measures have delayed the delivery of the next tranche. In more news from Pakistan, we'll give you updates on the recent increase in TTP attacks. Now, in two separate incidents in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, police and armed militants exchanged fire and incurred losses. A counter-terror operation in the Sarmad locality near Peshawar saw counter-terror teams exchange fire with the militants reportedly affiliated with the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. 4 militants were killed in the process, and weapons and minor explosives were recovered after hours of intense police operations. Another incident occurred in Bannu, where militants attacked a police checkpost with gunfire and grenades. The police were able to neutralize the threat with the support of armed villagers who came out in defense of the law enforcement officials against the militant threat. Now, Head Constable Pasham Khan lost his life to a bullet, while another official sustained injuries from a grenade blast as well. The police and counter-terror officials have been the first line of defense as militant activities rear their heads in Pakistan. The rise on such events is concerning, especially with the law enforcers suffering a dearth of funding and protections as they continue to thwart the security threats in their respective jurisdictions. Now let's talk about schools versus tech. ChatGPT has landed itself in trouble with schools and universities after teachers discovered students were using the open-source artificial intelligence tool to write their essays and assignments. The tool was made open for public use on November 30th, 2022. Microsoft, which has invested $1 billion in the OpenAI, owns a license to use GPT-3. Now, GPT, which stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, can generate text-based readable material such as poems, lyrics, and prose based on a vast amount of the text-based content that has been fed to the algorithms of the software. In response to fears of plagiarism by students, the New York City Education Department has decided to block the use of the tool on school networks. While students may not have access to the system on school-based networks, it is easily accessible from the mobile internet and at home. Both the ChatGPT and OpenAI strongly discourage the use of the tool for misleading purposes in schools or anywhere else. OpenAI says that it is developing mitigations to help anyone identify the text generated by that system. Recently, the internet witnessed a rise in demand-driven AI tools, which can generate the readable works as well as art pieces. Successes in these developments could also raise ethical concerns for creative and analytical industries. Some artists have questioned the use of AI for generating artwork, while others see it as a value enhancer for their work to design new concepts. As legal and policy experts grapple with limiting the use of AI in warfare, policy development, and even law enforcement, the introduction of these tools in open-source formats proliferate these concerns into education and creative spheres as well. The question now remains, will developers learn to consider ethics of AI applications before opening these tools for public use, or will the trend of retrospective critique remain the only thread keeping them in check? We'll let you know as we find out more. That's all, folks. We'll be back tomorrow with more bite-sized news that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the country, the region, and the globe. I'm Tayyaba, and this was your Daily Dispatch.